So I was in the supermarket today, and I had some free time. So I was perusing the magazine section and the section with all of the cheap sort of romance novels and so on. And I noticed that there's a number of copies in a little row of the Zombie Survival Guide by Max Brooks. If you're not familiar, Max Brooks is, especially the Zombie Survival Guide and also World War Z, have sort of reinvigorated zombie fiction in maybe the past decade or so in interesting ways. I think World War Z is currently being made into a movie and so forth. And the Zombie Survival Guide has sold hundreds of thousands of copies. I don't know, maybe over 1 million. So these are hugely successful books, and that's good for me, I suppose, because I actually wrote my own book about this, Weapons and Warfare in the Zombie Apocalypse. Uh, While I was in the store, though, I suppose I stopped and perused my way through some of the pages in the interior of the Zombie Survival Guide, and it actually reminded me why I didn't like some aspects of that book when it came out. I think I read it right after it was brand new, and it's an interesting concept. It's really fun if you like zombies. The problem with it is, especially where it comes to things like weaponry and warfare and the history of both of those, it's fairly clear that the author doesn't really know very much about what he's talking about. And that irks people who do know those things. I have a PhD in ancient history, and I have studied an awful lot about the history of warfare. And so lots of things contained in the section about weaponry, for example, betray a lack of knowledge of the subject. For example, one would be what the katana, Japanese sword, is described in the Zombie Survival Guide as being one particularly effective and something that weighs between 3 and 5 pounds, which is false. No katana ever made is going to be anywhere near 5 pounds. The heavier ones are going to be closer to about 2.5. And maybe that seems like a minor detail, but trust me, it's not. If you know anything about swords, if you've ever handled a sword, the difference of a pound is an awful lot of difference. And that's just one of many things that the book, The Zombie Survival Guide, seems to do when it talks about this stuff. It just doesn't betray much knowledge of the subject. Similarly with armor, we're told that armor is bad because it slows you down. And then we're given a description of full plate armor, something like articulated plate armor from maybe the 15th century, and then chainmail and I think shark suits and bulletproof vests and one or two others. But that's it. That's apparently the entire gamut as far as the Zombie Survival Guide is concerned of all of mankind's use of armor. And there are plenty of things besides plate armor. There's plenty of things besides chainmail. Lots of things that are much lighter and that would be actually effective in keeping you alive. And so my problem with the Zombie Survival Guide is it doesn't know enough of the history of what it's talking about. The tools that you use against zombies come from the real world. They come from the history of warfare. And humans have been using these for a long time. The Zombie Survival Guide asserts that swords and edged weapons have some drawback because eventually they're going to wear out because you're having to cut through a zombie's skull. And it suggests that this is sooner rather than later. Well, actually, the whole history of swords, for the most part, is many of them are designed to deal with humans who were wearing armor or using shields, and so they are implements designed to take a considerable amount of punishment, and they can take it. You can damage a sword fairly badly and then fix the edge and it will be fine. Against semi-squishy zombie skulls, I'm assuming they're semi-squishy because zombies are at least semi-rotten, right? The skull is one of the hardest parts of the body, or the hardest part of the body for good reason, is protecting your brain. But swords weren't designed skulls were not designed by nature to hold up really well to sword blades. Sword blades are capable of massive, devastating injuries on the human body. If you're curious about this, look up the Battle of Visby, V-I-S-B-Y. It took place in the 14th century in the island of Gotland. Enormous ugly wounds inflicted upon the skeletons of that battle. They were actually buried after the battle in their armor because it was hot and the bodies had bloated. So they were then entombed, and the ground is cold enough that it preserved them fairly well. So we have excellent archaeological evidence for the armor that the people were wearing when they died, and we also have excellent and gruesome evidence of all of the things that medieval weapons are capable of doing to the human body. Another thing about swords in the Zombie Survival Guide is that it'd be too tricky to use them, right? You can inflict a flesh wound on a human opponent, but it would be too hard to specifically target a certain body, and that's absolutely ridiculous. Medieval warriors, and anyone who has ever used a sword, in reenactment, you learn to strike at targets of opportunity. Often these are hands, anything exposed. But one of the main targets of a sword is actually the head. From a biomechanical point of view, the head happens to be the nearest thing if you're trying to strike another human. It's also quite effective to hit the head because it ends the fight. So from the historian's point of view, it's irritating to read the Zombie Survival Guide because it betrays a lack of knowledge about the subject, and it wouldn't have been that hard to get some rudimentary knowledge about these things. The author just didn't bother, and so I have bothered, even though while I think of myself as competition, I will probably never sell 1/10 the number of books. I can still rest easy knowing that I've done a good job accurately portraying what ancient and medieval weaponry is capable of doing in the hands of someone not even that knows how to use it with long practice, but is willing to think about it and apply themselves. So if you're interested in this and other similar topics and/or links to my books, you can find this at adamalazdare.blogspot.com. And thank you.